This is Eriogonum rostratum, which is a buckwheat, and it's full of seed. And it grows under Jeffrey pines around the periphery of Reno. But a housing developer is going to negatively impact this plant. And so the developer is being required to mitigate the damage. So we're harvesting, I harvested all this seed. It's got a unique smell to it.
When we go and do restoration work, it's hard to get seed, and it's not always there when you need it. The science of restoration has only been around for 100 years or so, and when we talk native seeding, it's really only been around for maybe 40 years. We're really in our infancy of figuring out how to even do what we do.
Having native seed for resilient landscapes is not as easy as getting a bag of seed from the hardware store.
It's very nuanced to time seed collections in nature.
This is not a simple go to Lowe's and buy yourself 5 pounds of seed and go sprinkle it on your lawn.
The seed supply chain is going to take time, it's going to take planning, it's going to take money, it's going to take infrastructure, and it's going to take us working with the farmers across the United States who are interested in working with us to develop it.
Seed need planning is understanding, first off, what are the restoration needs going to be in the next few years, and working back from that. And understanding if we know what we're going to need in, say, 3 or 4 years, then we can ask, okay, what are the species we're going to need? When do they need to go into production? And then we can go out and plan the wild seed collection that's going to support that. Restoration is needed for a variety of reasons. It may be to come in after a disturbance that was planned, like building a dam or a road. It could be needed after a wildfire or after some other kind of catastrophic disturbance, like a hurricane. Fire damage is becoming a pressure that is changing the need for native seeds in ways that we haven't seen in decades past.
It is very hard to predict what wildfires are going to do, what reactive needs are going to be. For some of the fires now, it's not just hundreds to thousands of acres, it's tens to hundreds of thousands of acres that are being affected and needing to be treated.
So we have to keep asking one another, what do we need? Because our predictions aren't always right.
You'll have years where there's virtually no demand. Like this year, demand is very low. We've had comparatively few wildfires. Then you'll have a year where like the whole world burns. And there's so much need that no one can keep up.
Private growers, contractors who grow native plants for a living are farmers. And so it's a risky business.
We're just a little mom and pop player. I think it's hard to believe that we're actually hand cutting the stuff this day and age. It seems sort of archaic, but it works. That's gorgeous seed. Just gorgeous. The native industry has always been volatile. There's a whole bunch one year, the next year there's none. The price goes from nothing to a fortune. Agriculture has also the protection of USDA crop improvement programs, disaster programs, insurance programs, and a stable market, supply, demand, and pricing.
My federal agency, we were the largest land managing agency. We're the largest seed buyer in the Western Hemisphere. One way that we're encouraging farmers to work with us is through the process of forward contracting. And that basically takes the risk off the farmer and puts it on the government.
If we can do what we call forward contracting, where we're identifying a certain quantity of seed for different species and seed zones that we want to purchase, and we have to obligate the funds up front for those contracts, they're guaranteed payment. So they're less prone to the whims of the market.
When we talk agricultural seed, we've been at agricultural seeding for tens of thousands of years. In our industrial agricultural systems, you're talking one species, you're putting it into a tilled soil, you know how to handle it. With native species, we don't get that luxury.
The most challenging part about working with native seed is the fact that we want to retain diversity and wildness. What we've done with farming is create the opposite. We've created plants that have rapid germination, that have uniform growth, that retain their seed, all bloom at the same time. Because it's easy. It's easy to go through and harvest a bunch of plants whose seeds are all ripe at one time and just stay on. When we're talking about restoration, we don't want to have plants that have this super narrow gene pool and all have the same traits. So it's challenging to farm a plant when you're trying to retain these wild qualities.
We are working with species nobody has ever worked with before. So there's some really basic biological information that we don't know about the species that we really want to use for restoration.
We haven't been studying these species like we have corn for decades. There's just so much we don't know that academia can answer.
You know, native plants have been here for millions of years. And then humans come along and we change everything. And so in my lab, we spend a lot of time thinking about, okay, what are the responses, the rapid evolutionary responses that plants can make to this new environment? Can we figure out what works now? Not what worked 100 years ago, but what works now. We can collect 16, 20 different populations. We can test how well do you do under a natural restoration scenario.
There's a lot of common gardens across the West, and it's considered common because it is the same environment for every seed being planted in, regardless of where that seed came from. So you can take seeds from Oregon, you can take seeds from California, you can take seeds from Wyoming and plant them all here in Nevada and compare how these plants have done to see where you can move them in a restoration context.
I'm working with the Forest Service for this Common Garden study. There's a couple different populations that were collected throughout Nevada, Idaho. The information that they get from this will be super helpful with restoration. They are trying to find populations that will do well once they are put in the landscape.
Oh my God, I love it. Do you just love this plant?
They're just so cute.
I could not love this plant more. Common gardens look basic, but this kind of information is one of the best gifts we can give future generations who are going to have to pick seeds for new climates. And we can say, well, from our observation, this is the strategy that works under this particular kind of climate.
We use common gardens to develop seed transfer zones, which can be used as a guideline for managers and other restoration practitioners to determine where they can plant certain sources of seed. What we would like to do is try to get seed that matches as much as possible, both genetically and climatically, to the location where that restoration is happening. There's 5,000 plant taxa in the Great Basin. Even though it's dry and even though there's not a lot of structure to see from, say, a car, there's a lot of intricate diversity that's out here. What you have are all these little plants that are down there, and they're neat and they're beautiful. One of the adaptations that we see in the field is that plants with narrower leaves, smaller stature, tend to do better in drier environments. So what they'll do is they'll invest more in a root system than in, say, their leaf structures in order to lose less water.
A seed zone is a geographic area that says it's okay to move seed sources or populations around within that area, and it'll be expected to be adapted to that zone. What is local is what grows best because of adaptation, because of natural selection at a location. Species occur across an environment, but what is local is the specific populations or genetic types that occur in a specific location.
Whereas if you were to move seed outside of that seed zone, it might not necessarily survive, it might not establish, and it might not become the native community that you're hoping to restore. You really do need those locally adapted native plants.
We match the species and the biotype collections very closely to the sites that we're seeding. This would be an example of stuff that was seeded about 10, 12 years ago, but this is a blue bunch wheatgrass that the original collection was right over the hill. We're within 30 miles of the original collection site. We keep the genetics as close to home as possible.
To my mind, what local is it's a gradient. It's something that the further out you go, the less local it will be, but we can at least measure the degree to which it is local. We have a restoration site and we want to source a seed. What we're looking for is something that is similar, but that we can also produce or we have on hand that's available that we can actually use in a restoration.
So you're identifying, say for a 5-year window, the amount of seed that you'd want to have on hand for different species and different planting areas, which for us are our seed zones. And so these seed use plans might have a list of all the projects and the acreage, composition of the seed mix, the target density of the planting. And you add all those up, that's your target quantity of seed that you would want to have sitting in the seed bank.
We need to be planning for the unplannable. Historically, here in the United States, and I would suspect it's around the globe, we wait until we have a crisis at hand, whether it is climate change, whether it's wildfire, whether it's drought. And that's when we respond. We can either go along with serendipity or we can have a strategy.
There are projects and programs worldwide at all kinds of levels, from local to regional to national and international, focusing on all the aspects of the seed supply chain, from collection to seed production and use on wildlands.
And there's lots of niches in the native seed supply chain. And it's niches of jobs, it's niches of knowledge.
It's very multidisciplinary. You need soil scientists, you need entomologists, botanists, geneticists, people working in restoration, putting the seeds back out on the ground, people working with equipment development. So just a wide variety of people that are needed